The sickening click of the bolt turning in the lock was the first sound I heard, a sharp, final report that echoed in the quiet of my home in the historic Candler Park neighborhood of Atlanta like a death knell. It was a sound I had never heard before, a sound of absolute finality. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic, animalistic fear as I saw the gleaming new padlock hanging from a hasp he bolted to the front door, a crude and horrifying monument to his cruelty. I was locked in. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me, a physical shock that stole the breath from my lungs and left my hands trembling. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate act of malice. My mind, which was usually a quiet and serene place, was a maelstrom of confusion and disbelief. My legs, which had carried me faithfully for 70 years, suddenly felt like lead. I made my way to the kitchen, a place that had always been my sanctuary, my most sacred space. The kitchen, once a place of warmth, laughter, and the heavenly scent of baking bread, now felt like a morgue. My gaze fell on the countertop, where a single, folded note lay under a small, empty plastic container. It was the food container I had given my grandson, Jamal, for his leftovers just last week. The container, which had been so full of my loving warmth, was now an empty, mocking symbol of my fate. The note in his familiar scrawl was a final, chilling punctuation mark on his betrayal. "Enjoy your retirement, Grandma. You've earned it." The cruel, twisted words were a punch to the gut, but the true horror came when I opened the pantry door. It wasn't just a simple robbery. The shelves, once groaning under the weight of glass jars of my homemade preserves, sacks of flour, and tins of my prized teas, were completely, mercilessly bare. The space was an empty, echoing void, a hollow testament to his chillingly thorough work. Every last grain of rice, every can of beans, every bottle of olive oil gone. He had even taken the salt and pepper shakers from the countertop, a petty, final act of pure evil. The absence of the food was a physical pain, a gnawing, aching hunger that had nothing to do with my stomach. In that single, horrifying moment, I wasn't just a 70-year-old widow. I was a target, and my own grandson had just orchestrated my death, not with a weapon, but with the quiet, chilling precision of starvation. I sank to the kitchen floor, my heart a silent, broken drum, a silent plea for strength leaving my lips. Before we continue, make sure you follow our page so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Loretta. I had spent 70 years building a life of quiet self-sufficiency. I was a retired baker, and my home was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and secure. The pantry was my pride and joy, a testament to my life's work. I had inherited the house from my late husband, Charles, a man who had taught me the value of honest labor and the quiet, humble joy of a full pantry. But my grandson, Jamal, saw my life not as a testament to faith and resilience, but as a roadblock to his ambition. He was a brilliant but entitled young man, a self-proclaimed tech entrepreneur who had invested all of his inheritance and most of his savings into a new online business, a decentralized finance DeFi protocol in Web 3.0 called Harvest Protocol. He believed it was the future of agricultural trading, a tokenized system that would make him millions overnight by bypassing traditional markets. His small office was in a cramped, rented space in the Midtown district, just a few blocks from Tech Square. His descent into greed wasn't a sudden fall, but a slow and insidious spiral that had begun years ago. I remember his late grandfather, Charles, telling me that Jamal was too obsessed with getting rich quick and not working for his wealth, a quiet, knowing sadness in his voice. Charles, a humble and hard-working man who had built his life on honest labor, had seen the seeds of entitlement in Jamal long before I did. He had tried to instill a sense of purpose and integrity in him, a lesson that had been utterly lost to the relentless, siren-like call of a life of easy wealth. The Harvest Protocol was just his latest and most ruinous obsession. I still have the memory of him sitting at my kitchen table, his laptop glowing, his eyes alight with a manic fervor as he explained the concept. He talked about smart contracts and liquidity pools like they were some kind of divine prophecy, a guaranteed path to a life of luxury. He showed me charts and graphs, promising that in just a few months, he'd be able to buy me a new house, a grand mansion with a full-time chef. I would just need to sign over the deed to my old home, the one he had always been so impatient to get his hands on, so he could use it as collateral for his next big venture. The protocol, however, had failed due to a sudden, devastating blockchain vulnerability that had been discovered by a rival firm, leaving him with a mountain of debt and a relentless, all-consuming need for money. The last conversation we had before the betrayal was etched in my mind with painful clarity. He had come to my house, his face a mask of strained politeness, and asked me for the deed to my house, a cruel demand for a piece of property that wasn't a commodity to be sold, but a sacred legacy of love and memory. I had refused, my voice firm with conviction. This house is not an asset to be liquidated, I had told him. It is a legacy to be cherished. The words, which I meant as an act of love, had built a wall of quiet resentment between us. He had stopped visiting, his texts becoming shorter and more demanding, his voice colder and more distant. He had always seen my faith as a weakness, a sentimental burden that stood between him and the life he felt he deserved. I knew he was desperate, but I had no idea just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. His descent into greed wasn't a sudden fall, but a slow and insidious spiral that had begun years ago. I remember his late grandfather, Charles, telling me that Jamal was too obsessed with getting rich quick and not working for his wealth, a quiet, knowing sadness in his voice. Charles, a humble and hard-working man who had built his life on honest labor, had seen the seeds of entitlement in Jamal long before I did. He had tried to instill a sense of purpose and integrity in him, a lesson that had been utterly lost to the relentless, siren-like call of a life of easy wealth. The week before he emptied my pantry, Jamal had visited me, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness that did little to hide the desperate, hungry look in his eyes. He had brought me a small, unassuming gift, a new bread knife, and insisted on helping me put away the groceries, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it should have set off 1,000 alarms in my mind. He had carefully stacked the cans, bags, and jars, his hands moving with a disturbing, cold efficiency. I had watched him with a heart full of love and gratitude, completely oblivious to the fact that he was taking inventory of his grand heist. When he left, he had hugged me tightly, a final, chilling embrace that was not of love, but of triumph. His body was tense, his arms a little too tight around my shoulders, and I could feel the cold, rigid purpose in his grip. It was a hug of possession, not affection, a final, chilling embrace that was not of love, but of a quiet, ruthless triumph. He had waited for the dead of night, for a time when the world was asleep, and had returned with a series of empty boxes, a rental truck he had rented under a fake name near the perimeter, and a heart full of a cold, ruthless ambition. He had emptied my pantry, methodically removing every last item, from the large sacks of flour to the small jars of spices. He believed that by leaving me with nothing, he would force me to sell the house and give him his inheritance early. His digital footprint on his phone was already a trail of his malicious intent, from e-commerce searches for bulk food containers to Google Maps searches for the quickest way to get to my house. He had even used a burner app on his phone, a VPN to hide his IP address, but God was watching. I remember his visit with a clarity that still makes my stomach churn. He'd come with a list, a mental catalog of my pantry's contents. He'd ask questions I'd answered so casually, so innocently. How many cans of tuna do you have, Grandma? Just curious. Do you still have that big bag of rice? You've had it forever. His questions, which I had dismissed as a loving curiosity, were a final inventory check, a meticulous preparation for a theft so cruel it defied comprehension. I recall the sound of his hands moving over the shelves, the quiet rustle of a bag of flour being lifted, the light clinking of jars being arranged. He was a professional, a technician of betrayal, and I was his unsuspecting mark. He was not just stealing my food, he was stealing my sense of security, my comfort, my peace. He was removing the very sustenance that my home provided, a quiet, chilling act that was more brutal than any physical violence. He had even taken the small containers of spices, my beloved herbs, a petty, final act of pure evil that was more about dominance than it was about food. He wanted to leave me with nothing, a physical and emotional void that would force me to surrender. His final act was a cruel, mocking hug, his hands gripping my arms with a chilling finality. I remember the coldness of his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth I had always known him to possess. It was the hug of a conqueror, a victor in a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. He had used my love, my trust, as a weapon against me, and in doing so he had become a stranger, a cold, calculating ghost in the house of my heart. The memory of him standing on my doorstep, his face a mask of false warmth, his eyes alight with a cold, terrifying purpose, is a memory that will forever haunt me, a silent testament to the moment my world was turned upside down. I now know that his embrace was not a gesture of love, but a final confirmation of his cruel, twisted plan, a final, triumphant embrace that said, "It is done." I had sat on the cold kitchen floor for what felt like an eternity, the silence a deafening roar in my ears. I was 70 years old, and without my pantry, I had nothing. My bank account was modest, and I was locked inside my home. I looked at the cold, sterile shelves and felt a wave of despair so profound that it threatened to drown me. A physical, gnawing emptiness began to ache in the pit of my stomach, a hollow pain that had nothing to do with a simple craving for food. It was the primal, terrifying sensation of being utterly without recourse. I was a bird in a cage, and the seeds of my survival had been cruelly plucked from their dish. The house, which had always been a bastion of comfort and safety, felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the window panes, sounded like a mocking echo of my solitude. The fear was a cold, constricting hand around my heart, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly alone. I looked at the heavens, the faint, silver moonlight filtering through the window, and I spoke a prayer, not of anger, but of a quiet, desperate plea for strength. I didn't ask for food, for money, or for rescue. I simply asked for the will to endure. "Lord," I whispered, my voice a frail, cracking sound in the vast silence, "I don't understand this, but I know you see me. Give me the strength to face this trial. Give me the grace to not lose hope. And if this is how my journey ends, please let it be in your peace, not in despair." As the last words left my lips, a profound stillness settled over me, a quiet calm that transcended my fear. It was in this moment of surrender that my eyes fell on a small, round pet hole, half hidden behind an old flour sack on the back wall of the pantry. It was a detail so small, so insignificant, that I knew Jamal had to have overlooked it in his rush. A rush of bittersweet memory flooded my mind. It was a hole my late husband, Charles, had installed decades ago for his beloved cat, Mittens, a small, furry companion who had been gone for almost 20 years. It was a forgotten relic of a life filled with love and simple joys, and now it was my only connection to the outside world. The next morning, as I sat in the silent kitchen, lost in a daze of hunger and contemplation, I heard a gentle scratching sound at the back of the house. It was not the angry, desperate sound of a mouse, but a soft, rhythmic scrape, as if something was being pushed slowly and deliberately against the back wall. I peered through the window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and saw a small, wrapped package slide through the hole. It was a miracle, a small box of instant oatmeal and a few hard-boiled eggs. The sound of a car driving away was the only clue I had. I didn't run to it. I crept, as if afraid the vision would vanish if I moved too quickly. I knelt and reached through the hole, my fingers trembling as I pulled the package toward me. I held it in my hands, a simple brown paper-wrapped bundle, as if it were the most precious treasure on earth. The oatmeal and eggs are not just food, they are a sign that I had been heard, a sign that I was not alone. This continued every morning for a week, a new package, each containing just enough food to keep me from starving. On the second morning, it was a bag of apples and a small tin of tuna. On the third, a container of yogurt and a few slices of bread. On the fourth, a small carton of milk and a handful of crackers. The food was never extravagant, never more than what was necessary to sustain a single person for one day. It was as if my benefactor knew exactly my needs and was providing just enough, a daily testament to their care. The routine became my anchor. I would wake up at dawn, my eyes drawn to the back window, and wait. I would listen for the faint, familiar scratching sound, the soft thud of the package, the quiet hum of a car engine fading into the distance. I was bewildered, but I was also filled with a new and powerful sense of gratitude. A quiet, fierce faith blossomed in my heart. Someone or something was watching over me. I did not know the face of my Savior, but I knew the hand of God was in this. My mind, of course, tried to find a logical explanation. Was it my neighbor Martha, who lived down the street? No, she would have knocked. She would have called out to me. Was it a kind stranger who had seen Jamal and become suspicious? Perhaps. But the consistency of the deliveries, the quiet, almost invisible nature of the act, felt so much larger than a simple act of human kindness. It was a series of small, perfectly timed miracles, and I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that I was the recipient of a grace I did not deserve. The food was more than sustenance. It was a daily promise, a silent, loving message from the heavens that I was seen, I was not forgotten, and I was not alone. The gnawing fear was replaced with a quiet, resolute hope. The despair was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I was still a prisoner in my own home, but my heart was free, nourished not by the food alone, but by the quiet, inexplicable hope it represented. I was now waiting, not for my end, but for the next chapter of my story to begin. The small, forgotten pet hole was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a lifeline, a testament to a grace that had found me in my darkest hour. The next week was a strange and surreal experience. I rationed the food that appeared at my back door. My spirit sustained not just by the food, but by the quiet, inexplicable hope it represented. I was still trapped, still a prisoner in my own home, but I was not starving. On the 7th afternoon of my confinement, I heard a frantic pounding on the door. It was my friend, Martha, a kind, tenacious woman who had an unwavering, weekly routine of checking on me. She and my other neighbors, who hadn't seen me all week, were worried. The sounds from outside were a cacophony of concern. The shouts of Martha, the low murmurs of my other neighbors who had gathered, the panicked urgency in their voices. I heard Martha rattling the doorknob with a desperate, frustrated energy, followed by a sharp gasp as she discovered the large, unyielding padlock on my front door. The sight of it must have been a punch to the gut for her, an instant and terrifying confirmation that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I heard her shouting my name through the letterbox, her voice cracking with fear and confusion. Then came the frantic ring of a phone as she made the call for help. The wail of sirens, faint at first and then growing louder, was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my rescue arriving, but it was also the sound of my darkest secret being laid bare for the world to see. A large, red fire truck from the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department rumbled to a stop in front of my house, followed by a police car. A team of firefighters, their faces a mixture of grim determination and professional calm, exited the vehicle. They approached the door, their heavy boots thudding on the porch, and I heard them conferring with Martha, their voices low and serious. A powerful, authoritative voice commanded them to stand back, and a moment later, I heard the metallic clang of a tool being removed from the truck. Then came a series of deep, guttural thuds as one of the firefighters began to strike the door. Each blow was a physical release, a shattering of the illusion of my grandson's control, and a testament to the fact that I was not alone. The sound of the door finally splintering open was like the breaking of a dam, a rush of sound and light that flooded the once silent house. They found me in the kitchen, calm and collected, with a small stash of food on the counter, the last of the daily provisions. The firefighters, seeing my serene demeanor, were stunned. I wasn't haggard and gaunt from starvation. I was a living testament to a divine intervention. My eyes were clear, my hands steady. The truth of my situation, the raw brutality of my grandson's plan, stood in stark contrast to the quiet dignity of my survival. When they asked what had happened, I told them the whole story, from the sickening click of the lock to the daily appearance of the food. I recounted Jamal's betrayal, his cold-hearted plan, and then, with a voice full of awe, I told them about the miraculous pet hole. I described the gentle scratching sound, the small packages, and the daily gift of sustenance. As I spoke, the miracle felt all the more real, a story so strange and so beautiful that it could only be true. When I was finished, I looked at the firefighters and then at my neighbors, tears streaming down my face. "Was it one of you?" I asked. "Did one of you see a way to help me?" They all looked at me with a profound, knowing silence, and then they shook their heads. There was an unspoken understanding in that moment, a shared recognition that this was not a simple act of human kindness. They had only just found out about my plight moments ago when they saw the padlock. My rescue wasn't a product of chance, but a culmination of a divinely orchestrated plan that had begun a week earlier, with an unknown person delivering packages of food through a forgotten pet hole. Jamal's grand, selfish plan had come to a swift and brutal end. The digital world he had so confidently inhabited turned on him with a cold, ruthless efficiency. The morning after my rescue, as he sat in his rented studio apartment, the Harvest protocol imploded. He was watching the live data feed, his eyes glued to the screen as the value of the token he had poured his entire life savings into began to bleed out, a cascade of red numbers and panic sell-offs. The code he had bet his life on, which was supposed to be flawless, had been exploited by a small, insidious vulnerability, a single line of bad code that had created a catastrophic ripple effect throughout the entire protocol. Within minutes, the value of the token plummeted to zero, a total, irreversible collapse that wiped him out completely. He stared at the screen, a silent scream of disbelief locked in his throat. He had no more assets to liquidate, no more credit to borrow. He was a man with nothing but a mountain of debt. The townhouse in Buckhead he had been living in, a sleek, modern townhouse he had always believed was a monument to his future success, was repossessed by the bank within a week. The eviction notice was taped to the front door, a stark, white piece of paper that mocked his foolish belief in a quick-fix solution. He stood in the empty driveway, watching as the repo men methodically loaded his belongings, his expensive furniture, his state-of-the-art electronics, into a large moving truck. He felt a profound sense of déjà vu, a sickening twist of fate that was a perfect, ironic parallel to the day he had emptied my pantry. The empty rooms of his repossessed house felt like a haunting echo of the bare shelves he had left for me. The cold, impersonal cruelty of the bank, the way they had taken back their loan with no remorse, felt like the universe's ultimate karmic retribution for the cold, impersonal cruelty he had inflicted on me. His so-called friends, the ones who had cheered him on from the sidelines, were the first to abandon him. He reached out to them, his voice a pathetic mix of desperation and shame, but his calls went to voicemail. His texts went unanswered. He was an embarrassment, a failure, a ghost of the person they had once admired. They were not friends, but a fair-weather audience, and when his show ended, they simply left the theater. He was a man with no home, no money, and no friends, a ghost of his former self, a specter of the person he had once been. He was a man who had tried to starve his own grandmother for a house deed, and in a perfect, poetic display of justice, he found himself begging for food on the streets. He was a shadow, a whisper of his former self, a silent monument to his own greed. His hunger was not a passing discomfort. It was a constant, gnawing pain that was a brutal and visceral reminder of his crime. Every pang in his stomach was a silent accusation, a relentless, punishing echo of his betrayal. I saw him one evening, a few weeks after my rescue. I was volunteering at a soup kitchen near Centennial Olympic Park, a place where I now spent my days, serving warm meals to those who were less fortunate. I saw him huddled in a corner, his face a mask of hunger and despair, a cardboard sign in his hand that read, "Homeless. Please help." My heart, which had been so full of a fierce, protective love just moments ago, felt a sudden, sharp, and painful pang of recognition. It was him. He was a ghost of his former self, his once vibrant eyes now hollowed out by pain and shame, his face sunken, his clothes tattered and dirty. He didn't see me, his gaze fixed on the floor, but I saw him. The shame and guilt were etched onto his face as if they had been branded there. He was no longer the confident, entitled tech entrepreneur. He was just a hungry, broken boy who had lost his way. The thought of him in a prison cell, of him being judged by a court of law, suddenly seemed so small, so insignificant. I knew that the true punishment for his crime was not a prison sentence or social ostracization, but the profound and terrifying silence of a soul that had lost its way, a soul that was now starving for the very thing it had tried to deny another. His body was starving for food, but his soul was starving for forgiveness, for a kindness he had long since forgotten how to give or receive. In the end, my grandson's cruel plan for my house and his grand scheme for quick money both failed. He did not get the deed, and his own greed led him to lose everything he had, forcing him to face the exact kind of hunger he had tried to inflict on me. The poetic justice was a lesson for us both. He was a man who had tried to steal his inheritance, but in a divine and humbling twist of fate, he found himself without one. The house that he had always seen as a simple financial asset to be liquidated was saved, and I was given a new life, a new purpose, a new home built not of bricks and mortar, but of love and faith. My story is a painful but powerful warning. A life built on greed is a house built on sand, ready to collapse at the slightest tremor. But a life built on faith, love, and grace is a fortress, unassailable against even the most destructive storms. If this story has resonated with you, if you have faced your own storms of betrayal or loss, I pray you will take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Recognize the unseen hand that has guided you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.